As always, so much to talk about. Really important things. Important things like how do we keep ourselves alive through coronavirus and the pandemic? Can we keep our economy alive? What are we going to do about Brexit? Things that actually have a real effect on real people's lives. But actually, a lot of the woke culture we often hear about, a lot of the obsession with diversity, the obsession with taking offence at everything, the virtue signalling we see on social media, a lot of that, well, we look at it, we see it, and we kind of laugh it off and move on because, well, it's just nonsense on social media, isn't it? It doesn't affect real people. Except, of course, when it actually does. Well, that's what prompted a letter that was signed by dozens and dozens of leading writers and academics and artists, along with the likes of J.K. Rowling, Noam Chomsky and Salman Rushdie, who himself very much a victim of cancel culture when he faced that fatwa. But they wrote a letter, an open letter published in Harper's Magazine in the United States, saying we need to bring an end to the cancel culture. We need to bring an end to people basically being hounded from public life, hounded from social media, and hounded, more crucially, from their ability to earn a living, hounded from their jobs, simply for expressing a perfectly reasonable opinion. Frankly, even if it's not a perfectly reasonable opinion, you're still allowed to express those. Last time I looked, before we had the thought police. Well, let's talk about this cancel culture. Does it exist? Should it exist? With my next guest. Now, you'll know him well, of course, and actually a colleague of my previous guest, joining with me all this morning, Tom Slater, is the editor of Spiked Online, Brendan O'Neill. Good morning to you, Brendan.
Hi, Julia.
I wish there was just only one topic to talk about in this section, but actually, we've got not only that letter, we've got then the 150 academics writing a letter condemning the letter about free speech in the cancel culture. We've had Billy Bragg, a man who actually I've got a lot of time for and really like. I've done a lot of TV with him. He's a really nice guy, but he's been criticising George Orwell for his defence of the right of freedom of speech. And then we've got Labour boycotting Facebook over what they say is their failure to control hate speech. Again, your idea, my listeners' idea of what is hate speech may be rather different from theirs. We've got the whole Black Lives Matter, the virtue signaling. We've got Lewis Hamilton, why are other people not taking the knee, etc., etc. This has all come together into, a vortex of just sort of pain for an awful lot of people. I think a lot of the country, I think my very sensible listeners will be just going, what on earth is this all about? Don't we have real problems? But this is becoming a real problem for real people, isn't it?
It's a very real problem, and I think what we're witnessing a crystallization of the contemporary forms of censorship, and there's just all-out war on freedom of speech at the moment. There's no other way to put it, and cancel culture is very real. People are being threatened, harassed, bombarded with death threats. Sometimes they're losing their jobs. Sometimes they're being arrested by the police, as has happened to people who have said things skeptical of transgenderism. All of this stuff is happening. It's happening all the time. And what it's given rise to is an incredibly stifling culture in which lots of people feel that they can't say what they really believe. And that's the target of cancel culture. It's not really about bringing down J.K. Rowling. You can't bring her down. She's too big. She's too important. It's about sending a warning to the rest of society to shut up, listen to these orthodoxies, and don't dare deviate from them.
And the difficulty there is even if people did want to obey the rules, I'd say you and I probably are not people who are too obsessed with those sorts of things and rather braver. But again, at a risk to ourselves being cancelled at some point. But actually, a lot of people who do want to do the right thing, given that it's what would or would not have been acceptable, it's not even keeping up with what it was 10 years ago or even a year ago. The rules change by the week or sometimes by the hour sometimes. So something that you could say that would have been... So, for instance, you and I have done a podcast recently where we were discussing how when we were growing up, and I'm a little bit older than you, but I'm sure it was the same for you, saying, I don't see colour, I'm not raised to judge people based on their colour or to see differences based on colour. That is now considered by the woke to be a racist thing to say. Whereas, until, not when I was growing up, 40 years ago, but 2 years ago, 2 months ago, that was seen as being a liberal viewpoint.
Things change all the time. You're absolutely right, and with terrifying speed, which really demonstrates you mentioned Billy Bragg criticizing Orwell. It really shows that we're living through a pretty Orwellian climate with a constant reworking of language, the invention of new words, the invention of new ideas, and we're all expected to buy into these new words and to repeat them and to take the knee and bow down before them instantly with no questioning whatsoever. But the color blindness thing is a very good example of this and just how terrifying it can be. For a very long time, really from Martin Luther King onwards, it was considered the good, decent thing to do to refuse to see someone as a racial character and instead to see them as an individual with the same rights and the same right to equality as everyone else. That's what was the good thing to do. Now, all of a sudden, we're told that people who say we should live in a colorblind society are themselves being racist because they are refusing to acknowledge the racial experience of certain groups,
but also refusing to acknowledge their own unconscious bias. So if you say I'm not a racist, that means by definition you are a racist because you're not acknowledging your unconscious bias. I mean, it is difficult to keep up, isn't it?
It's very difficult to keep up, and it shows how crazily therapeutic a lot of this is becoming. This idea that we're all walking around with this unwitting racism lurking in our heads. We don't even know it's there. Yeah. And it has to be cleansed out of us by these kind of magicians of the woke lobby. And the thing is that it's so destructive, it's so divisive, because the message it's sending out to the public is, listen, everyone's racist. Everyone hates black people or Asian people. All these white people are really the scum of the earth. You've got to keep a close eye on them. You've got to monitor them at work. You've got to make sure they say the right words. You've got to clean their brains out. It's giving rise to an absolute authoritarianism where now we have these unconscious bias police who are basically want to get inside our heads and make sure that we have correct thought.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because it is actually not illegal in this country yet to express views which other people might find offensive. Now, we do have hate speech. We have this concept of a hate crime. And again, we've talked about this many times. This is a entirely subjective crime. So someone who's not involved, who's not spoken it, who's not heard it, wasn't directed at them, they've just been told about it, they can report something else as a hate speech, even though there's no victim, no one perceives themselves as a victim, if they find it offensive. And it is actually logged as a hate crime. And when we're told there's this massive spike in hate crimes, particularly we heard about this after Brexit, that anyone reporting anything, it is logged without any evidence whatsoever or that any crime has taken place. But if someone perceives it, even though they've got the facts wrong, whether the facts are right or wrong, it still counts as a crime. And that, again, that is against every single principle of our justice system.
Completely. And this is what is going to snowball and go completely out of control. And we are going to get to a situation very soon where you could very easily lose your job or lose your place in polite society if you say something that's un-PC or if you aren't 100% loyal to the new language and the new orthodoxies of political correctness. This is what really worries me. We talk about Billy Bragg. The other thing he said recently is that if someone says something which is in some way delegitimizes the rights of minority groups, which again is a very vague term, then bosses have the right to sack them. We've also seen people like Owen Jones, a supposed radical leftist, calling for someone to be sacked from the University of Oxford because of what they tweeted. We have
no, it wasn't. No, they didn't even tweet something. They simply like to tweet that someone else has said. Now, I don't know about you, people who aren't on Twitter, the sane people who aren't on Twitter. I use the like button. I think they've now introduced a new button. I never remember where it is. But if I just think, oh, that's interesting, or that's an article I might read later, or I'll note that I think that might be something worth raising on my show. I don't have to agree with it. I don't actually necessarily think, yeah, completely, but I will like it as a way of bookmarking it to find it again much more easily. The idea that simply pressing a button on your phone means that you should be sacked from your job. I mean, when you said a few moments ago, you said people might start being sacked from jobs. This is already happening. We know the Free Speech Union is constantly representing people, the journalists from Manx Radio and the like, who are, and I'm a member of the Free Speech Union because I believe what they're doing, who are losing their livelihoods because of something someone else perceives that they have said.
And absolutely right. And what's shocking about this is the fact that it's often the left that's at the forefront of this. Now, I used to consider myself a leftist, and I still think of myself as being on the left of politics. And my view of the left is that you defended working class people's right to have a job. You defended the working man, the working woman. You certainly didn't say that the boss class, as one might call it, had the right to police the thoughts of their workforce and to punish them for having certain political opinions, whether it's on transgenderism, on Black Lives Matter, or anything else. And that's why Keir Starmer, the Labour Party's boycotting of Facebook until it does something about so-called hate speech is also another terrifying example of this, because they're basically empowering the billionaires of Silicon Valley to tell ordinary Facebook users what they're allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say. So the left has completely lined up with the most powerful forces in society and are goading them on to police people, to sack people, to punish people. And that's cancel culture summed up.
And again, the people who say cancel culture doesn't exist are the people busy trying to actually cancel people. Look, genuinely, I know, because I've been, I wouldn't use the word victim because I never felt a victim in my life, but I'm certainly a subject of it on a fairly regular basis by sort of campaigns and accused of hate speech, accused of the word vile. They always use, particularly against women, they use that word vile. But I've had that ever since being called a fascist and a racist for supporting Brexit. So we've got a culture, and people, 52% of this population voted for Brexit. Yeah. Those people think that all of you are horrible, nasty, racist, terrible people. I mean, people think that it's not happening to them. It's just these silly woke people who get into these debates. This is taking down real people on ordinary incomes doing ordinary jobs, and they are losing their jobs. They're going to be hauled in front of HR. They're going to end up in tribunals and the like. I think people need to stand up and be counted, because a lot of people thinking, I'm not going to speak out because I might get in trouble. If you don't speak out now, you may not have the opportunity to ever do so.
I think that's the most important lesson of all of this. We all have to stand up to this culture, say what we believe, and stand together. I mean, that's the great thing about Brexit. It really was millions upon millions of people defying the establishment, most of which said, please, please, please vote Remain, defying the establishment, saying this is what we want, this is what we believe in, this is what we think should happen. They've been completely demonized for 4 years. They've been called fascists and racists and xenophobes and stupid and low education and all those other insults that were thrown at the good people who voted for Brexit. But they stood by what they believed in. They carried on fighting for it, and they ensured that the masses ensured that Brexit happened. We can really learn a lesson from that, and we really ought to rally together and stand against these new authoritarians.
Hear to that. Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked Online, thank you very much.